What's going on, Internet? IG back again today, and today is kind of a bit of a follow-up video from the video that I did a couple of weeks ago talking about why power users hate GNOME. And I guess this, in some ways, this is a video responding to some of the stuff that was coming out of the comments. And what was interesting to me is that there were plenty of people that seem to agree with the notion that the direction that the GNOME desktop was taking does seem very counter to what power users appreciate and what they like. But also there was a lot of discussion on a couple of different things. First of all, what constitutes a power user? What exactly do they want out of a desktop? And not only that, but is GNOME actually that counter to what power users want? And so this video in defense of GNOME Shell, in defense of GNOME 3. And so just to give a bit of background, this is running on OpenSUSE Leap 15. And so it's a pretty stabilized version of the GNOME desktop. It is very vanilla as well, apart from a different background. That's literally all that's been changed here. And as you can see, I don't have a lot else to choose from, so that is what it is. But honestly, I think I've learned a lot over the last couple of weeks in preparation for this video, in terms of understanding what the makers of GNOME and what some of the power users who appreciate the simplicity of GNOME, what they like about it. And so in this video, we're going to attempt to defend GNOME and some of the decisions that it's making, and you might not agree, and that's okay. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. But I thought it's only fair that we give a follow-up and give a space for justification for the power user, and I'll try and define who that is and why they do actually appreciate GNOME 3. And by the way, that was the other big one that came up. The pronunciation of GNOME. Oh my gosh, this one just goes back such a long way. Look, honestly, it doesn't matter which way you pronounce it. The reason that I pronounce it GNOME with the G at the front is because it's named after the GNU. It's something around, the acronym stands for the GNU Object Model something. And just the way that you pronounce GNU in the way that the Free Software Foundation talks about it, you apply the same logic to the way that you pronounce the acronym with which GNU is part of, and you get GNOME. But as it points out in the MIT definition and the how to pronounce GNOME, no one should kill you for pronouncing it GNOME either. Free software advocates typically, in my experience, pronounce it GNOME, but of course GNOME works fine as well. So I just wanted to call that out there before I say GNOME a billion times and I get that one grumpy guy in the comments saying learn how to talk. Okay, so there's one person in particular that I want to give a particular shout out to in terms of my learning process with how the GNOME desktop was designed to work. And ultimately that's the fundamental shift here is. A lot of power users, actually, you know what, press pause. Let's talk about power users for a second. To me, a power user is anyone who uses their computer for more than just the standard ordinary computer stuff. So if you do more with your computer than just word processing, browsing the web, manipulating your files and that kind of thing, that might mean you're a software developer. It might mean that you're a photographer that processes a lot of photos. It might mean that you are a system administrator. It might mean that you're a graphic designer and you have a lot of files that you're doing and communicating with people in your team and all of that kind of thing. To me, a power user is somebody that uses their computer more than your average consumer. And so honestly, I think it encapsulates a lot of different use cases. And to that end, a power user's desktop needs to be pretty flexible. So to all of you people who go, oh, the only true power experience is a terminal, tell me how you edit photos or edit video or do graphic design in a terminal and I'll be impressed. But a power user is anybody, to me, is anybody that's going to use their computer as more than just an appliance. It's actually a tool to get meaningful work done on a platform where they literally can't do that kind of work on any other sort of platform. So that's just my own personal definition. That's what we're going to work with in this video. Okay, so when it comes to the way that GNOME works. And I think this is the fundamental shift that happened for me, is that this desktop environment is designed to be very keyboard driven, and that wasn't something that was immediately apparent to me when I first was using GNOME 3 when it first came out. And the reason being is because it does look very touch friendly. And while there were efforts to make this desktop touch friendly and suitable for hybrid devices, it was still by and large very much meant to be keyboard driven. And keyboard driven to the point where it actually is inefficient to use your mouse. Now, what does that mean for you? If you are a power user who does a lot of stuff on your computer, you've got a lot of stuff going on, and you're constantly using your mouse to navigate your way around the computer, which is pretty standard for Windows and Mac and a lot of other systems, that means that switching to a primarily keyboard-driven interface is going to be a learning curve, and it's going to feel like you're going to lose some efficiency and some productivity in trying to make that switch between a keyboard-driven interface and a mouse-driven, object-driven interface. So I want to give a shout out to AJ Reissig for his tutorial, I guess, or explanation of how he uses the GNOME shell as his workflow, and he very clearly lays out what he appreciates about GNOME shell and how he uses it on a day-to-day basis. And I think this is really important if you're wanting to give GNOME a fair shot, is to understand the philosophy behind it and understand some of the ways and means of getting stuff done on the desktop. So basically, for me, the most powerful thing in GNOME shell is always going to be the Windows key, or the meta key, depending on what kind of person you are. So the Windows key is kind of like the hub of everything that you do. You're going to press that to give you the activities overview. You're going to use that to search any files that you've been working on. So you can see the screen recordings of OpenSUSE Leap I've got here, just sitting here. Whether you're looking for particular settings, so maybe display settings, you can see they're categorized on the desktop by what function they serve, whether it's a GNOME shell extension in the software center, whether it's a setting, whether it's an app. It's all categorized and filtered. Again, this is all designed to be driven by a keyboard. Now, not only that, but when it comes to actually managing your windows and managing your workspaces, this is meant to be done on a very dynamic basis. So what I mean by dynamic is that instead of just having one desktop and piling up all your windows and picking and dragging windows around to try and get them out of the way of each other, it's very much designed to morph and change how many workspaces and desktops you have open to accommodate for whatever you're doing. Hence why when you open up a new workspace, or let's say, for example, you bump your mouse up here to the top, you drag a window over to a new workspace, it's going to create a new one. Or if you switch and then drag something from there down to a new one, it's going to create another new one. And this is designed intentionally to give you an unlimited amount of workspace, and then to be able to jump quickly between apps. Instead of alt-tabbing your way through things, which is kind of the traditional desktop paradigm of doing things, what GNOME is designed to do is to use the Windows key and page up, page down to be able to switch quickly between the windows and the displays that you already have open and visible to you. So to me, while this does require a bit of relearning, and I don't know why Spotify is just hanging here, we can close that. It does require a bit of relearning, absolutely, because it's not exactly muscle memory, but at the same time, this is way less awkward than going Control, Alt, arrow keys, and maybe you mess that combination up and now all of a sudden your cursor's doing all kinds of weird things. It's a very dynamic way of managing your windows and your workspaces, but at the same time, it's also very static in that what happens on your desktop is going to stay at where you left it on your desktop when you switch between workspaces. Now, all of this is to say that this is a very specific way of doing things. This is a very specific workflow, and unless you can get your head around that, or unless it works well for you, then you're going to find it kind of puzzling, or at the very best, you're going to find it inefficient. And I think that's what, seeing someone like AJ explain how he works with it and how he makes it work for himself is really helpful. Because once he kind of unpacks it and talks about the logic behind it, you could see, or at least I could see, getting behind that kind of thing and going, oh, okay, yeah, I think I could use that. I feel like it would create quite a bit of resistance for me to change to that full time, absolutely. But there is some other elegance here that's tucked behind the scenes, behind the way that GNOME Shell works. And I guess their continual vision is to get the desktop environment out of the way almost completely, almost entirely, as much as possible, so that whatever app you have open in front of you, that is what is going to take priority. So, like I mentioned, very keyboard driven, but when it comes to things like notifications and the sort of stuff that could potentially interrupt you, that is all very tucked away, and it's very, and for a lot of users, it's too obscure, it's too out of the way. But for somebody who wants to just get work done and be focusing on the work that they have in front of them, then having things like notifications tucked into one small place, a tiny target at the top of the screen, is not only makes sense because you can just jump straight to the top middle to check what's going on, but it also is very minimal in terms of interruption. And they've constantly been reworking how notifications work to try and minimize the amount of interruptions that you get while you're working. And then the same can be said for all these controls. They try and tuck as much control and information into the tiniest box possible, so that this doesn't pull you out of what you're doing. So in a sense, this desktop is less like a desktop metaphor in what we're used to in traditional, I guess, user experience design, and it's more like a canvas. It's something that expands and contracts based on the project that you're working on, and depending on how much space you need, that's what's going to that is the main tool that you're going to work with, is this expandable canvas. In this case, being able to move up and down dynamic workspaces, spreading yourself out over those, and that would also then explain the move of not having the window controls built in here. So minimize and maximize. Again, you can grab these. You can use the keyboard shortcuts of Meta and up and down to maximize and minimize windows. You can tile them to the left and the right, and all of those animations are very, very smooth, which is excellent. But again, if you're thinking about using a dynamic canvas of a workspace, then you're not going to be needing to minimize very many windows or get them out of the way entirely, because you've got all these workspaces to spread out on. And so I don't know. The more that you kind of play around with it, and the more that you immerse yourself in the logic of what the GNOME Foundation and what the GNOME team are working on, the more it starts to make sense. Now, here comes the big caveat, and this is where I feel that a lot of users have just jumped off the GNOME wagon altogether and just said, you know what, forget it. That is that this requires a lot of change in behavior, and changing human behavior is one of the hardest things you will ever do in the entire world. And that is why there are so many power users, or so many just traditional desktop users, that do not appreciate this model of working, and the fact that they're needing to readjust their work habits to make it work for them. It seems very precocious or very pushy on behalf of the GNOME team to force people to adopt this workflow or this model of doing things. For me personally, I can see the value in it, but at the same time, I feel like my habits are too far solidified. I would need to spend like a lot of time in GNOME Shell before I felt like I was being as productive as more traditional setups like Plasma or Budgie or those sort of setups. So ultimately, I think GNOME has a lot. I do honestly think that GNOME has a lot going for it, and for the people that can figure out its workflow and jump on board with that and make it work for them, I think it's worth the effort. And because I mean, you watch someone like AJ jump around and do what he does on GNOME Shell, and how he works and makes it work for him really easily, you think, you know what, this might actually be worth learning. Of course, your mileage is always going to vary, and I think that's what we've got to be realistic about. And yes, it's not for everyone, and I think GNOME knows that. But at the same time, they're doing their best to work toward a vision that is that is on track with where they want to go, and that is very simple, very elegant, focusing on the work that you have in front of you, not letting the operating system distract from the work that you need to get done. And so again, if you go through a lot of their design language, their guidelines for how apps are meant to be designed and all that kind of thing, it all kind of points to that central ethos of wanting to focus on productivity, keyboard-driven interface, and still have something that is smooth and works well. Now, of course, there are going to be always criticisms of GNOME being too heavy and it's too clunky and it's not buttery enough and all this kind of thing, and they're aware of that, and I think they're working on that. But these things take time as they figure out what functionality they can strip out and what functionality they need to keep in there or replace back. For example, being able to put things, being able to pin things on the desktop. Apparently, that's coming back to GNOME after they stripped it out, simply because they're learning that people actually really appreciate that. So all of these things are constantly in a state of flux, but if you can get on board with the central vision of what GNOME is doing, and for those who already have, there's a lot of people out there that actually, and a lot of power users that actually genuinely love GNOME. That's where I'm going to finish today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. The defense of GNOME Shell. Again, let me know what you guys think down below, and let me know if this has made any sense to you, and I'll definitely link this video from AJ down in the description below, and you can go and check that out as well. Alright, that'll be all from me. Subscribe and like this sort of stuff, if indeed you do, and I will catch you all in the very next video. Peace out, ladies and gentlemen.